The air inside the temple was thick with the scent of burning laurel leaves, the smoke curling upward like ghostly fingers reaching for the heavens. Shadows danced along the marble walls as torches flickered, casting an otherworldly glow over the sacred chamber. A king knelt in silence, his trembling hands clutching an offering of gold and olive branches. Behind a veil of mist, a woman sat upon a sacred tripod, her eyes rolled back, her voice low and haunting. "A great empire will fall," she intoned, her words echoing through the chamber. The king's breath caught in his throat. To him, this was the voice of the gods themselves, a direct message from Apollo, delivered through his most trusted oracle. What he didn't know was that this so-called prophecy was no divine revelation. It was a carefully constructed lie, whispered into the oracle's ear by men who never showed their faces, men who pulled the strings of kings and generals alike. These were not priests. They were spies, masters of information warfare, who had discovered the most powerful weapon in the ancient world, belief. Before we dive into this web of deception and betrayal, tell me where you are watching from, and what time it is right now. Drop it in the comments below. And while you're there, hit that like button, share this story with someone who loves hidden history, and subscribe so you never miss another untold spy case like this one. Now let's travel back to the golden age of ancient Greece, where wars were fought with swords and spears in the daylight, but empires were destroyed in secret, through whispers in darkened halls and words cloaked in divine authority. In the 5th century BCE, Greece was not a unified nation. It was a fractious collection of city-states, each fiercely independent, each locked in bitter rivalries with its neighbors. Athens, the cradle of democracy, clashed constantly with militaristic Sparta. Corinth vied for control of trade routes. Smaller states were caught in the crossfire, forming and breaking alliances in a never-ending game of survival. In this world of shifting loyalties, information was more valuable than gold. A single secret, the size of an army, the weakness of a city's walls, the betrayal of an ally, could decide the fate of thousands. But unlike today's intelligence agencies, ancient Greece had no formal spy networks. Instead, temples and religious sanctuaries became the perfect cover for gathering intelligence. None were more powerful than the Oracle of Delphi. Perched high on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, the sanctuary of Delphi was the spiritual heart of Greece. Here, the Pythia, the high priestess of Apollo, would inhale sacred fumes and deliver cryptic prophecies believed to come directly from the gods. Kings, generals, and statesmen traveled from across the known world to seek her guidance. They would bring lavish offerings, sometimes entire treasuries, just to hear a few words that could determine whether to wage war, form alliances, or pursue peace. To the people, the oracle was divine and infallible. But behind the temple's veil of mysticism, something far more human was at work. The Pythia herself was often in a trance, her ramblings interpreted by a council of priests. These priests were the true power, and many of them were secretly part of a growing intelligence network. They collected information from pilgrims, merchants, and travelers, piecing together a map of political events across Greece. When a king came seeking prophecy, they didn't just interpret the will of the gods, they shaped it. Consider the brilliance of this scheme. A ruler would never question the oracle, because to doubt her was to doubt Apollo himself. If the oracle advised him to attack a rival, he believed it was divine will. If she warned him to hold back, he obeyed without hesitation. In reality, the advice was strategically crafted by spies who knew exactly what outcomes would benefit their hidden masters. Now imagine you are that king. You've built your life and kingdom on faith in the gods. You've sacrificed, prayed, and trusted the oracle's wisdom since childhood. Would you question her? Or would you march your army into battle, certain that the heavens were guiding your every move? What would you have done? Trusted the prophecy completely, or started to wonder if the gods themselves were being used to deceive you? The network's reach extended far beyond Delphi. Merchants along the bustling trade routes acted as informants, overhearing conversations in taverns and markets, then passing along valuable scraps of intelligence disguised as harmless gossip. Messengers carrying official decrees were bribed to reveal their contents or to delay delivery at crucial moments. Even wandering philosophers, admired for their wisdom, sometimes worked as covert operatives, subtly influencing public opinion through their speeches. All of this information funneled back to the temple, where it was analyzed and weaponized. The priests understood a key principle of psychological warfare. People will believe almost anything if they think it comes from a higher power. By framing their manipulations as divine prophecy, they eliminated the risk of suspicion. No one dared to accuse the Oracle of lying. Even rival city-states who distrusted each other still placed blind faith in Delphi's guidance. One of the most infamous examples comes from the years leading up to the Persian Wars. As the mighty Persian Empire prepared to invade Greece, city-states scrambled to decide whether to resist or submit. When Athens consulted the oracle, the prophecy she delivered was terrifying. "Your wooden walls will save you." The Athenians were divided. Did this mean they should fortify their city with wooden palisades? Or did it refer to their fleet of wooden warships? In the end, they chose to interpret the message as a divine command to build a navy, a decision that ultimately led to their victory at the Battle of Salamis. To history, this appears as a moment of divine intervention. But some historians argue that the prophecy was carefully designed to manipulate Athens into choosing the very strategy that certain factions wanted. Who stood to gain from Athens becoming a naval power? Merchants who controlled trade routes, political leaders with ties to the shipyards, even foreign powers who needed Athens strong enough to challenge Persia, but not so strong that it could dominate Greece after the war. This was the brilliance of Delphi's network. The oracle never gave direct orders. She spoke in riddles, leaving just enough ambiguity that leaders would interpret her words in ways that suited their fears and ambitions. If the outcome was favorable, they praised the gods. If it was disastrous, they blamed themselves for misunderstanding the divine message. The spies behind the curtain remained invisible, their true role hidden by layers of myth and faith. By now, the web of deception was so vast that even those within the temple may not have fully understood who they were serving. Some priests were true believers, convinced that they were merely instruments of Apollo. Others were pragmatic, using the oracle's power for personal gain. And above them all, perhaps unseen even by the priests themselves, was a shadowy council, a group of master manipulators who treated the Greek world as their chessboard. As the oracle's influence grew, so did its danger. A single prophecy could spark a war. A few carefully chosen words could topple a dynasty. Rival city-states began to suspect that Delphi might not be as impartial as it claimed, but none dared speak openly. To accuse the oracle of deceit was to invite the wrath of the gods, and perhaps something even worse. Some rulers tried to test her. They would send disguised messengers with false stories, hoping to catch the temple in a lie. But the network was always one step ahead, its spies so deeply embedded that they detected these traps long before they reached Delphi. Every challenge to the oracle's authority only reinforced the illusion of her divinity. The most chilling part of this tale is how thoroughly the line between truth and deception blurred. Even today, historians struggle to determine which prophecies were genuine religious experiences and which were deliberate acts of manipulation. The records are fragmentary, the evidence ambiguous by design. That is what makes this story so terrifying. We may never know how many of the great decisions of ancient Greece wars fought alliances, forged empires risen and fallen, were guided not by the gods, but by a handful of spies, hiding in the smoke and shadows of a sacred temple. The king kneeling before the oracle never saw the dagger behind the curtain. He heard only the voice of a woman in a trance, speaking words that would seal his fate. And as he rose to carry out the will of the gods, the spies smiled in the darkness, knowing that once again they had turned faith into a weapon. The network behind Delphi was far more than a group of priests whispering cryptic words to gullible kings. It was a machine carefully built over generations, designed to gather intelligence, manipulate rulers, and control the political landscape of the ancient world. And like all the most dangerous machines, it operated in silence, invisible to those it manipulated. By the time a king or general stepped foot inside the sacred temple, their fate was often already sealed. At its core, the Oracle's spy network relied on information flow. In a world without newspapers, radio, or written records accessible to the masses, temples were the perfect hubs for gathering secrets. Pilgrims from every corner of the Greek world traveled to Delphi, bringing offerings and questions. They came seeking divine guidance, but in truth, they provided the spies with what they needed most: knowledge. Merchants gossiped about trade routes and shortages. Soldiers boasted of upcoming campaigns. Diplomats hinted at secret treaties. Even simple farmers brought news of unrest in the countryside or strange omens in their villages. The priests listened carefully, always pretending to be holy men concerned only with spiritual matters. Behind the scenes, they meticulously compiled this information, storing it like treasure. Over time, they created an informal map of the entire political world: who was preparing for war, who was plotting rebellion, who was vulnerable to manipulation. But this network didn't stop at Delphi's gates. It stretched outward like a web. Across Greece and beyond, the cult had agents in disguise: traders, sailors, entertainers, even wandering philosophers. These were the perfect spies, able to travel freely without suspicion. They slipped through markets and palaces, gathering intelligence while appearing harmless. When they returned to Delphi, they reported everything they'd seen and heard. The brilliance of this system was that it looked organic. To outsiders, it seemed as if information simply flowed naturally into Delphi because of its religious importance. No one realized that it was being deliberately shaped, filtered, and weaponized. One of the most cunning methods the network used was strategic prophecy crafting. The Oracle never issued clear commands. Instead, her pronouncements were deliberately ambiguous, forcing leaders to interpret them through their own fears and desires. This gave the network plausible deniability, while ensuring that the target would walk willingly into the trap. Imagine a king preparing to invade a rival city. If the spies wanted to provoke a disastrous war, they would deliver a prophecy like, "A lion will devour the sun." The king, eager for victory, might interpret this as a sign that his enemy, the sun, would be destroyed. Emboldened, he would launch his attack, only to discover too late that he was the lion, and his own kingdom was the one destined to fall. If the spies needed to prevent a war, they could craft a different message, something vague and ominous, like, "Only ruin awaits those who march beneath a blood moon." Fear and uncertainty would paralyze the king, buying time for the network's true allies to maneuver behind the scenes. This wasn't just manipulation. It was psychological warfare centuries before the term existed. Leaders were conditioned to see the oracle's words as divine truth. Even when a prophecy turned out disastrously, they rarely blamed Delphi. Instead, they assumed they had misinterpreted the god's will. This allowed the network to operate without consequence, always cloaked in the untouchable authority of Apollo himself. One of the most revealing glimpses into this hidden world comes from the period leading up to the Persian Wars. At that time, the Greek city-states were deeply divided. Some wanted to resist Persia's vast army, while others considered submission the safest course. Into this chaos stepped the Oracle of Delphi, whose guidance would shape the fate of the entire Greek world. When Athens consulted the oracle, the prophecy was famously cryptic. "Your wooden walls will save you?" The Athenians debated fiercely. Some believed this meant they should fortify the city with wooden palisades. Others argued it referred to their navy of wooden warships. In the end, they chose the latter, building a massive fleet that would go on to defeat the Persians at the Battle of Salamis. To history, this decision looks like divine foresight. But behind the curtain, the reality may have been much darker. The network already knew Persia's strategies through its spies scattered across the empire. They understood that only a naval defense could possibly succeed. By crafting a prophecy that nudged Athens toward this course, they ensured the Greeks would resist Persia, not out of unity or patriotism, but because they had been manipulated into doing so. This also served another purpose. It created a permanent power shift in Greece. After the war, Athens' newfound naval strength allowed it to dominate trade and politics for decades. reshaping the entire balance of power. The network didn't just save Greece. It designed the future of Greece, using prophecy as its tool. But the oracle's network wasn't omnipotent. Its manipulations required precision, and even a single unexpected event could unravel an entire plan. When this happened, the consequences were catastrophic. Consider the case of King Croesus of Lydia, one of the richest men in the ancient world. Before launching a campaign against the rising Persian Empire, Croesus consulted the oracle. The prophecy he received was tantalizing. If you cross the river, a great empire will fall. Believing this meant the Persian Empire would be destroyed, Croesus marched confidently into battle, only to suffer a crushing defeat. The great empire that fell was his own. Historians have debated this incident for centuries. Was it simply a tragic misunderstanding? Or was it deliberate sabotage? Some evidence suggests that the network had been infiltrated by Persian agents, who manipulated the prophecy to ensure Croesus would make a fatal mistake. If true, this would mean Delphi was not merely a Greek tool of influence, but an international battlefield for competing intelligence factions. The network's true genius lay in its ability to remain hidden. Even kings who suspected manipulation found themselves powerless to act. To accuse the oracle of deceit was unthinkable. It would be seen as blasphemy, risking rebellion among the deeply religious populace. And so, rulers continued to kneel, continued to listen, and continued to be deceived. The people closest to the oracle were often just as blind. The Pythia herself, the woman delivering the prophecies, may not have fully understood the role she played. Under the influence of intoxicating fumes and ritual chanting, she entered a trance-like state. Her words were chaotic and incoherent, giving the priests total freedom to shape them into whatever message they desired. The deeper you look, the more you realize that Delphi wasn't just a religious site. It was a theater, a stage upon which the greatest political dramas of the ancient world were performed. The priests were the playwrights, the kings their unwitting actors, and the people their enthralled audience. By now, the lies were so thick that even the truth sounded like deception. Kings didn't just fear their enemies. They feared their own advisors, their allies, even their own families. When every prophecy could be a trap, paranoia became the dominant emotion of the age. Do you think the kings truly believed they were following the will of the gods? Or were some of them secretly aware that they were being played like pawns on a divine chessboard? As the network expanded, its reach became almost incomprehensible. It influenced elections in democratic Athens, shaped military campaigns in Sparta, and even reached into the courts of foreign rulers like the Persians and Egyptians. It wasn't about loyalty to a single city-state or cause. The network served only itself, manipulating events to maintain its own power. And yet, like all complex systems, it had a fatal flaw: overconfidence. The more successful the network became, the more ambitious its schemes grew. Prophecies became bolder, deceptions riskier. Rival factions began to emerge within Delphi itself, each trying to steer the machine for their own purposes. This internal conflict would eventually lead to one of the most dramatic and disastrous manipulations in history. A single prophecy, so perfectly designed, so devastating in its consequences, that it would shatter kingdoms and expose the network's true nature to the world. The stage was set for betrayal on a scale that even the gods themselves might have feared. The prophecy that would shake the ancient world began like so many before it, with a king, a question, and a journey to the Oracle of Delphi. His name was King Croesus of Lydia, one of the wealthiest rulers at his time, a man so rich that his very name became a symbol of unimaginable wealth. His treasury overflowed with gold, his armies were vast, and his ambition knew limits. Yet even the richest man in the world could not buy certainty. To the east, a new power was rising, the Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great. Persia had already swallowed neighboring kingdoms like a relentless tide, and Croesus knew it was only a matter of time before they turned their gaze toward his own lands. He faced a choice: submit to Persia or challenge them in war. But which path would secure his legacy? In those days, no decision of such magnitude was made without consulting the Oracle of Delphi. Croesus prepared lavish gifts, including gold so pure it seemed to glow with its own light, and sent an entourage of advisors, soldiers, and priests to accompany him on the long journey to the sacred temple. The world watched, for this was not merely a king seeking divine guidance, it was a test of the gods themselves. When Croesus arrived at Delphi, the temple erupted with pageantry. The Pythia, cloaked in white robes, entered her trance as the sacred fumes rose around her. The priests asked Croesus's question, should he go to war with Persia? The oracle's answer came in a voice both chilling and mesmerizing. If you cross the river, a great empire will fall. The words echoed through the chamber, heavy with mystery. Croesus fell to his knees, overwhelmed by what he believed was divine clarity. A great empire would fall, and surely, he thought, it must mean Persia's empire. With renewed confidence, he prepared for war, convinced that the gods themselves were on his side. But unseen in the shadows, the oracle's network of spies watched with cold precision. This prophecy was not a prediction. It was a weapon. In the weeks before Croesus's visit, the network had been busy gathering intelligence. Persian spies had infiltrated Lydia's court, learning of Croesus's movements and ambitions. Merchants along the trade routes whispered of Persian troop buildups, while traveling philosophers delivered coded messages about shifting alliances. Every piece of information flowed into Delphi like blood into a beating heart. The network already knew exactly what Croesus would ask, and more importantly, they knew how to shape his answer. By crafting a prophecy that seemed to favor him, while leaving room for catastrophe, they created a trap from which there was no escape. Croesus's generals questioned the prophecy's meaning. Was it truly a sign of certain victory, or a warning of doom? But Croesus silenced their doubts. To question the oracle was to question the gods, and no man dared risk such sacrilege. Blinded by faith and pride, he marshaled his armies and crossed the Halys River, the border between Lydia and Persia. At first, everything seemed to confirm the prophecy's promise. Croesus's forces won several early battles, pushing the Persians back and boosting morale. His allies rejoiced, and offerings poured into Delphi in gratitude. The network's plan was unfolding perfectly, but then came the Persian counterattack. Cyrus the Great, a master strategist, feigned retreat to lure Croesus deeper into hostile territory. Once the Lydian army was overextended, the Persians struck with overwhelming force. In a matter of days, Croesus's forces were shattered, his capital city besieged. As the fires of war consumed Lydia, the awful truth became clear. The prophecy had been a double-edged sword. The great empire that would fall was not Persia's, but Croesus's own. In that moment of crushing defeat, Croesus began to suspect the unthinkable, that he had been manipulated, not by the gods, but by men hiding behind divine words. His faith crumbled as he remembered the ambiguous phrasing, the smug certainty of the priests, the way they had steered his questions and interpreted his answers. The realization was like poison spreading through his veins. He had been a pawn in a game he never understood. Do you think Croesus realized too late that he was deceived? Or did he go to his death still believing the gods had spoken through the oracle? The fall of Lydia sent shockwaves throughout the Greek world. Other kings began to whisper nervously about the oracle's true intentions. If Delphi had deceived Croesus, could they be trusted at all? But even in the face of suspicion, the network remained untouchable. Whenever a prophecy failed spectacularly, the priests blamed human misinterpretation. They reminded rulers that the gods spoke in riddles, and mortals were too flawed to always understand their will. This clever deflection ensured that no matter how disastrous the outcome, Delphi's divine reputation remained intact. Behind the scenes, however, the network celebrated its triumph. With Lydia destroyed, Persia's expansion continued, exactly as the network had planned. Some historians believe Delphi was secretly aligned with certain Persian factions, using its influence to subtly guide events in Persia's favor. Others argue that the network served no single master, manipulating both sides to maintain a delicate balance of power that kept them relevant. The most chilling theory of all is that the network wasn't simply reacting to events, it was creating them. By planting the right information, sowing the right fears, and issuing the right prophecies, Delphi could manufacture wars, topple rulers, and reshape entire regions without ever lifting a sword. As Croesus languished in defeat, his fate became a symbol of the oracle's terrifying power. Even in captivity, he tried to warn others. Legend says that when Cyrus captured him, Croesus cried out, "O oracle, your prophecy has destroyed me." Cyrus, intrigued, investigated Delphi himself. When he realized how cleverly the prophecy had been crafted, he supposedly laughed, for he recognized a fellow manipulator. Cyrus spared Croesus's life, perhaps out of respect for a worthy rival, or perhaps because he saw value in keeping a man who understood the power of information alive. Some accounts even suggest that Cyrus began to employ his own spies, inspired by Delphi's methods. In this way, the network's influence spread beyond Greece, seeding the very concept of state-sponsored espionage into the Persian Empire itself. By now, the lies were so deep, so tangled, that even the truth sounded like deception. Kings no longer knew whether the gods were guiding them, or whether unseen hands were pulling their strings. Wars became games of shadow and whispers, with prophecies as deadly as swords. This single prophecy, "If you cross the river, a great empire will fall," marked a turning point in ancient intelligence history. It proved that words alone could achieve what armies could not. A throne could be toppled, a kingdom erased through nothing more than carefully chosen ambiguity. But it also planted the seeds of the network's eventual downfall. Croesus's defeat was so dramatic, so public, that it drew unwanted attention. Some began to suspect that the oracle's power was not divine at all. Quietly, in back rooms and shadowed corridors, rival factions began plotting to expose or destroy Delphi's influence. The network, however, remained confident. They believed themselves untouchable, their web of spies too intricate to ever be unraveled. What they didn't realize was that their greatest weapon, fear, was also their greatest vulnerability. The more they relied on terror and deception, the more paranoid their own members became. Dozens of priests and agents began to suspect each other of betrayal. Secret factions formed within the network itself, each trying to steer prophecies for its own benefit. This internal struggle set the stage for chaos. And so, while the outside world continued to kneel before the oracle, whispering prayers to a god that may never have been listening, the true battle moved into the shadows. A war fought not with spears or shields, but with lies, secrets, and betrayals so profound that they would echo through history for centuries. The next prophecy would not simply decide the fate of kingdoms. It would decide the fate of the oracle itself. The fires of Lydia had long since turned to ash, but the echo of that disastrous prophecy, "If you cross the river, a great empire will fall," never faded. It lingered like a ghost over the Greek world, a constant reminder that even the most powerful kings could be reduced to pawns by a single whispered phrase. For a time, the Oracle of Delphi seemed untouchable, its network of spies weaving the fate of empires as easily as a spider spins its web. But power, once grown too vast, begins to consume itself. In the years after Croesus's fall, cracks began to appear within the network. Rival priests fought for control over key messages. Certain factions started issuing prophecies that contradicted others, not out of divine confusion, but as part of a hidden war waged inside the temple's marble walls. Each faction believed they alone should control the future of Greece. At first, these internal struggles were invisible to the outside world. Prophecies remained cryptic enough that few noticed the inconsistencies. But the whispers began to spread. A Spartan general, after receiving conflicting prophecies before a campaign, returned home in anger, muttering that perhaps the oracle's visions were not the voice of the gods, but the schemes of men. For a spy network built entirely on the illusion of divinity, doubt was more dangerous than any enemy army. The turning point came during the Peloponnesian War, a brutal conflict between Athens and Sparta that engulfed the entire Greek world. Both sides desperately sought Delphi's guidance, offering vast treasures to secure favorable prophecies. The network, now deeply divided, tried to play both sides against each other. Some priests favored Athens, using their prophecies to push its leaders into bold naval campaigns. Others sided with Sparta, delivering messages that encouraged land-based strategies and political sabotage. The result was chaos. For the first time in history, leaders began to openly question Delphi's impartiality. When a key prophecy disastrously misled the Athenians, leading to a catastrophic defeat in Sicily, suspicions erupted into rage. Many Athenians accused Delphi of treachery. While they dared not storm the temple outright, rumors spread like wildfire. The oracle was corrupt, a puppet for hidden interests rather than a conduit for divine will. The network's greatest weapon, the people's unquestioning faith, was slipping through their fingers. Inside the temple, paranoia reached a fever pitch. Priests spied on one another, accusing their rivals of leaking secrets to foreign powers. Informants who once worked together began assassinating each other in the night. A web that had once connected the entire Greek world began to devour itself. Some spies, sensing the end was near, attempted to burn records and destroy evidence of the network's operations. But others, consumed by greed, began selling secrets to outside factions. Kings and generals suddenly found themselves in possession of information that should have been known only to Delphi's inner circle. A carefully crafted illusion of divine omniscience crumbled. It was a lesson as old as history itself. The very tools used to control others, lies, manipulation, and fear, eventually turned inward, destroying those who wielded them. As Greece staggered toward ruin, Delphi's decline became inevitable. Fewer rulers traveled to seek the oracle's wisdom. Those who did came not with reverence, but with suspicion. Offerings dwindled. Whispers of revolt grew louder. Even the common people, once devoted to Apollo's sacred sanctuary, began to see the temple not as holy ground, but as the heart of a sprawling, sinister conspiracy. The final blow came not from a rival king or army, but from the passage of time. As Greece fell under the sway of foreign powers, first Macedon, then Rome, Delphi's political influence became irrelevant. The new rulers had their own intelligence networks, their own ways of gathering and controlling information. By the time the Roman general Nero visited Delphi centuries later, the temple was a shadow of its former self. The once mighty network had dissolved into legend, its agents either dead, scattered, or absorbed into other empires. Yet while the physical temple crumbled, its legacy endured. The methods Delphi perfected, psychological manipulation, strategic ambiguity, the weaponization of belief, were passed down through generations. From Roman senators to medieval monarchs to modern intelligence agencies, the blueprint created by the Oracle spies lived on. Even today, leaders use narratives carefully crafted to guide public opinion. False flags, propaganda, and psychological operations are modern echoes of those ancient prophecies. The tools have changed, but the game remains the same. In the end, the true tragedy of Delphi was not the fall of a temple or the death of a king. It was the realization that for centuries, entire civilizations had been shaped not by divine will, but by a handful of unseen manipulators. The last Pythia, standing amid the crumbling ruins of her temple, is said to have whispered a final, bitter prophecy. The god departs, and Delphi dies. Perhaps she meant Apollo, or perhaps she meant the network itself, finally stripped of its power. But even as the smoke cleared and the sacred halls fell silent, one truth remained. Ideas, once unleashed, do not die. The concept of controlling nations through information had been born, and it would never vanish. The ruins of Delphi still stand today, visited by tourists who marvel at its history without ever knowing the shadowy secrets that once pulsed through its stones. They see a place of ancient religion, not realizing it was once the headquarters of one of the earliest and most dangerous intelligence operations in human history. And perhaps that's the most fitting legacy of all. The network's greatest weapon was invisibility. Even now, thousands of years later, its true story remains hidden beneath layers of myth and legend. As we look at the modern world, with its constant flow of information, propaganda, and secret agendas, we must ask ourselves, are we really so different from the kings who knelt before the oracle, begging for guidance? Or are we still listening to voices cloaked in mystery, mistaking manipulation for truth? And with that, The Spies' empire of secrets finally collapsed, leaving behind a legacy written not in marble or gold, but in betrayal. If this story kept you hooked till the very end, smash that like button. Share this video with someone who loves untold spy stories. And subscribe right now, because the next case we uncover might reveal something even more shocking.